Of all the great inventions of the Industrial Revolution, the railways had the most impact. In a world before rail, travel over any distance was a major undertaking. Regions of even small countries, such as France or England, could be up to 7 days' journey from the capital, while large countries like the United States, China or Russia could take months to cross. Until the early 19th century, most people lived their whole lives within the confines of the town or rural area in which they were born, and no one had ever gone faster than a horse could gallop. Travel was simply too difficult and too expensive for the vast majority of people, which in turn limited the spread of ideas and technology. Lack of mobility was a major barrier to economic and social development. In the absence of rapid transport, people could starve within only a few hundred kilometres of plentiful food supplies. The slow transit of goods by horse and cart or along rivers and canals meant that perishables had to be consumed very rapidly. Sending a letter across the country took days, and newspapers were a misnomer, since they were effectively full of old information. It took months for people to learn the fate of loved ones at war, and news of major events, from even just a short distance away, filtered through slowly. Limitations on travel also translated into social restriction. People had little choice of spouse, since opportunities to meet potential marriage partners from even neighbouring towns were rare. Concepts of time, too, were different before the railways. Daily life was regulated by the sun, and towns just a few kilometres east or west of each other could operate on different schedules. Then the railways arrived and changed everything. One of their first major impacts was to force countries to standardise their measurements of time, both nationally and internationally, since railway timetables would otherwise be too confusing. Greenwich Mean Time, the standard by which the world sets its clocks, was created partly as a result of the railways, and the US was divided into 4 time zones for the same reason. The Trans-Siberian, the longest railway in the world, still operates according to Moscow time, even though the line crosses 7 time zones on its way to Vladivostok. Punctuality and timekeeping thus became vital, not just with regard to the railways, but in all spheres of life. The railways created the structured day, which prior to their arrival had been 10 hours long, rather than today's norm of 8. In other words, they created the 9-to-5 routine. The railways overthrew all established concepts of distance and time, and social upheaval followed. The last vestiges of feudalism were swept away, since people were no longer tied to the land. Indeed, they could now work far from home. People worked standard hours and expected to do so for a wage. Thus, the growth of capitalism went hand in hand with the expansion of the Iron Road. As people no longer had to find employment near their homes, towns and cities could become far larger than would previously have been possible. Suburban sprawl, often thought of as a product of the automobile age, is in fact the result of the development of commuter lines. Access to long-distance travel, in relative comfort at fairly low cost, changed people's horizons and opened up their imagination. What had previously been impossible became routine, such as going to the seaside or visiting an exhibition. On a social level, the scope for potential marriage partners suddenly broadened, being no longer confined to the immediate vicinity. The exchange of ideas took off, as national conferences could now be convened, and the inventions of the Industrial Revolution spread, first across Britain, then across the world. Professional sport became feasible, as clubs and their supporters could travel long distances to play other teams, and league size was limited only by how far a team could travel in a day.